How voting in Canada really works. The FPTP system explained. Canadian federal elections are conducted using a voting system known as First Past the Post, FPTP, which has been in place since the country's first election in 1867. While this system is relatively simple in terms of how votes are cast and counted, it can lead to complex political outcomes, including debates about its fairness and efficiency. In this video, we'll break down exactly how FPTP works in Canada, explore its advantages and disadvantages, and compare it to alternative systems that have been proposed. What is First Past the Post, FPTP? First Past the Post is a plurality voting system, meaning that the candidate who receives the most votes in a given riding or electoral district wins, regardless of whether they achieve a majority, more than 50% of the total votes. Canada is divided into 338 ridings, and in each of these, voters cast a single vote for their preferred candidate. The candidate with the most votes in each riding wins a seat in the House of Commons. The party that wins the most seats usually forms the government. If they win 170 or more seats, they form a majority government, meaning they can pass legislation without needing the support of other parties. If they win fewer than 170 seats, they form a minority government, which requires the cooperation of other parties to maintain confidence in the House and avoid triggering another election. Advantages of FPTP. 1. Simplicity. One of the most significant advantages of FPTP is its simplicity. Voters only need to make a single choice: who they want to represent their riding. The candidate with the most votes wins the seat. This straightforward process means results are typically clear and quick, with election outcomes usually known by the end of election night. FPTP also ensures that voters don't need to rank candidates or allocate preferences, which can make other electoral systems more complicated and time-consuming for both voters and electoral administrators. 2. Stable governments. FPTP tends to produce stable governments, often with clear mandates. In many cases, the winning party secures a majority of seats in Parliament, enabling it to govern effectively without needing constant support from smaller parties. This leads to fewer supply and confidence agreements or coalition governments, which can sometimes struggle with internal disagreements and instability. Majority governments under FPTP can act decisively, passing legislation and implementing policies more efficiently without the need for continual negotiation. This is often seen as a benefit in times of crisis or when rapid action is needed. 3. Direct representation. FPTP ensures local representation. Every riding in Canada is represented by a Member of Parliament, MP, who has been directly elected by the people in that district. This means voters can hold their specific MP accountable for their actions and decisions in Parliament. The system gives a direct link between the electorate and the legislature, allowing for more personalized representation. For example, if an MP fails to deliver on campaign promises or does not adequately represent their riding's interests, voters can directly vote them out in the next election. 4. Excludes extremist parties. One of the often cited advantages of FPTP is that it tends to prevent smaller fringe or extremist parties from gaining representation in Parliament. Because the system requires a party to win a plurality of votes in a specific riding, parties with broad, moderate appeal are more likely to win seats than those with more extreme or niche platforms. This helps ensure that Parliament is composed of parties that reflect a wider, more mainstream range of political views, which some argue contributes to stability and national unity. Disadvantages of FPTP. 1. Disproportionate representation. One of the main criticisms of FPTP is that it can lead to disproportionate representation. This means that the distribution of seats in the House of Commons doesn't always, and nearly ever, reflect the overall popular vote. For instance, a party could win 40% of the total votes nationwide, but secure 60% of the seats in Parliament due to how the votes are distributed across ridings. Conversely, a party that receives a significant percentage of the vote across the country, but finishes second in most ridings, might end up with very few, if any, seats. This phenomenon is known as the wasted vote problem, where votes for losing candidates don't contribute to the final composition of Parliament. A famous example of this occurred in the 1993 federal election. The Progressive Conservative Party won 16% of the national vote but secured only 2 seats in the House of Commons. Meanwhile, the Bloc Québécois, with just 13.5% of the national vote, won 54 seats due to concentrated support in Quebec. 2. Regionalism FPTP can exacerbate regional divides by rewarding parties with strong regional support while penalizing parties with broader but less concentrated national appeal. For example, a party that dominates one province may win a disproportionate number of seats compared to a party with support spread across the country. This can lead to perceptions that certain regions are overrepresented in parliament, while others are underrepresented. It can also foster feelings of alienation in areas where the dominant party doesn't align with local political preferences, leading to a sense that the electoral system doesn't accurately reflect the diversity of political opinion across the country. 3. Majority governments with minority support. Under FPTP, it's common for a party to form a majority government without winning a majority of the popular vote. For example, in the 2015 federal election, the Liberal Party won a majority of the seats, 184 out of 338, allowing them to form a majority government, even though they received only 39.5% of the popular vote. This disconnect between the number of seats won and the percentage of votes received can lead to questions about the legitimacy of the government, especially if a large portion of the population feels underrepresented by the ruling party. 4. Discourages. Smaller parties FPTP can discourage the growth of smaller parties, as the system tends to favor larger, more established parties. Smaller parties that might have significant support in various parts of the country, but not enough to win individual ridings, are often shut out of parliament. For example, the Green Party has struggled to gain representation in the House of Commons, despite consistently receiving a notable share of the national vote in several elections. In the 2019 election, the Green Party received almost 7% of the vote, but won only 3 out of 338 seats. This disproportionate result highlights the system's difficulty in representing smaller parties that have widespread but not concentrated support. Alternatives to FPT. Several alternative electoral systems have been proposed to address the disadvantages of FPTP. Here are 2 of the most commonly discussed options in Canada. 1. Proportional representation. Under proportional representation, the number of seats a party wins in Parliament is proportional to the number of votes it receives. For example, if a party wins 30% of the national vote, it would receive roughly 30% of the seats in the House of Commons. PR systems aim to more accurately reflect the will of the electorate and ensure that smaller parties are represented in Parliament. However, PR often results in coalition governments, as no single party typically wins an outright majority. This can lead to more negotiation and compromise, but also to potential instability. 2. Ranked choice voting, RCV. In a ranked choice voting system, also known as instant runoff voting, voters rank candidates in order of preference. If no candidate receives a majority of first preference votes, the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and their votes are redistributed based on voters' second preferences. This process continues until one candidate achieves a majority. RCV helps ensure that the winning candidate has broader support among the electorate, as it reduces the likelihood of vote splitting, where similar candidates split the vote, allowing a less popular candidate to win. Why FPTP hasn't changed? Despite the criticisms of FPTP, efforts to reform Canada's electoral system have not been successful. The most recent attempt came after the 2015 election, when the Liberal Party, led by Justin Trudeau, promised electoral reform. A special committee was established to explore alternatives, and public consultations were held across the country. However, by 2017, the Liberal government abandoned its promise to reform the electoral system, citing a lack of consensus on the best alternative. One of the challenges in changing the system is that FPTP tends to favor the larger parties that dominate Canadian politics, parties that would likely lose seats under a more proportional system. As a result, there is little incentive for the parties in power to pursue electoral reform, even if the public is dissatisfied with the status quo. Canada's first-past-the-post electoral system has shaped the country's political landscape for over a century. While it offers simplicity, stability, and local representation, it also has significant drawbacks, including disproportionate representation, regionalism, and the marginalization of smaller parties. As calls for electoral reform continue to arise, the debate over whether FPTP truly serves Canada's democracy remains ongoing. While efforts to change the system have so far fallen short, the conversation about the future of Canadian elections is far from over. Will Canada one day move towards a more proportional system? Or will FPTP continue to dominate the political process? Only time will tell. By breaking down the mechanics of FPTP and examining its advantages and disadvantages, we hope this video gives you a clearer understanding of how Canadian elections work and why electoral reform remains a hot topic in the country. Like and subscribe, as we'll soon be releasing videos on alternative voting systems and how they could affect Canada's voting system.